In this video, I'll be using a 3D scanner to scan my steering column cover on my car. Then I'm going to reverse engineer it on a CAD software on my computer. Then design some gauges around it and 3D print it. And hopefully it'll all fit. What's up guys, it's C-Joy back with my supercharged E46 M3. And I'm doing another 3D scan and print project. Ever since I got these two new tools, I've been flooded with all kinds of ideas and things I can make for the car. So let's jump into it. This is the inside of my track car, and way over here are two new gauges I just installed, an oil pressure gauge as well as an oil temperature gauge, and that's why all the wires are still kind of sitting out there. So the goal for this project is to be able to mount those gauges on top of the steering column cover here and here. And the reason I want to do them here is because mounting them way out here is starting to become really out of the view when you're trying to pay attention on what's in front of you. So if I have them down here, I could quickly turn my eyes and read them and get back to seeing what's in front of me. So here's the plan. I'm going to use my 3D scanner and I'm going to scan the inside of the interior. And then afterwards, I'm going to remove the steering column cover, and then I'm going to do a high definition scan of just the steering column cover. Then I'm going to take the scanned models and I'm going to import them to a CAD software called Fusion 360. Going to do a little reverse engineering. I really need to get a good model of that steering column cover so I can make a platform for the gauges. But once that platform is made, I can then design some gauges and place them wherever I want and then print it. And hopefully when I print it, everything fits in the car. So let's see if it's going to work. Einstar did release a firmware update recently, and it allows you to screencast whatever you're seeing on the display onto a device. And I was thinking that would be a good way to screen record and show you a clearer image or video of what I'm seeing when I'm scanning the object. But unfortunately, when I tried to do the screencasting, it just lagged too much and always disconnected. I was trying to record the display onto my phone, so going back to my GoPro rig that I set up because it's a little more reliable. For scanning the car, I'm going to be using the fast mode up here, and basically because this is just going to be a quick scan and high level scan with a really wide field of view just to capture the interior of the car. And so it kind of gives me an idea when it comes down to making the gauges where I place them and kind of where they will kind of sit relative to the steering wheel and the field of view as if I was sitting in the car and driving. And if you're ready to scan, you hit the play button and you basically move the scanner around. So if your tracking is lost, you kind of have to go back to where you were at. And you keep moving around until you get everything that you need. Once you're done, or if you need to take a break, you hit the pause button. And when it's paused, you can check to see what you got so far. If you like what you got, you hit the check mark. And I'm going to hit complete. And that's pretty much it. Saved to my model library. So on to scanning the steering column cover. To remove the gauge pod, let's just snap off. And hopefully it comes off with one hand and without breaking. There it goes. And I've already applied some tracking dots in preparation to do a high definition scan on this. I set up the steering cover on a wooden box that's just acting as a platform. And I set it up this way because I want to be able to move completely around the part 360 degrees, because I want to obtain a full 3D scan of the entire part. And just like before, I have a lot of tracking dots here that will assist with the tracking on the 3D scanner. So before we start scanning, I'm looking at my distance meter on the right to make sure we're kind of in the middle and that we're not too far or too near. And to actually start scanning, you hit the blue play button. Now that it's scanning, kind of move left to right, up and down, all over the part. As the tracking dots turn from white to red, that indicates which dots it's using to track the object. And as the object turns from red to green, green means good data. I'm going to pause here. You can review what you got so far. I'm going to take this time to move around the object. And to resume scanning, I'm going to hit the blue play button again. And I'm going to keep scanning on this side of the part. And you pretty much keep doing this until you have captured the entire part. But for this video, I'm going to stop it here. Again, you can review what you got. If you like what you got, you could hit the check mark. And then you can hit complete. I'm over at my computer now. I'm going to load up those 3D scan models. I'm using the StarVision app, which is the software that comes with the Einstar Vega 3D scanner. So what you're looking at is the scan result of the steering column cover. And if you zoom in, you could see all the data points that it's captured. It's a lot because it's the high definition mode for the 3D scanner. So what you do in StarVision is you basically clean up your scan model to prepare it to be imported to Fusion 360, which is the CAD software that I'll be using. The way you clean it up is you choose one of these tools to select what you don't need and then delete it. Gonna delete that. Once you're done cleaning it up, and you could take your time to really clean it up so you don't have a lot of junk that's just killing your memory while you're editing the scan models in CAD. But I'm just going to do a quick one and leave it as is. Once you're done, you hit the check mark. Then you click generate mesh. I'll just leave it at the default settings, but you could play around with this to achieve what kind of smoothing and resolution you want with your scan models. Then you do preview. This is what it looks like when the mesh is complete. Looks pretty smooth and clean. Unfortunately, it did pick up holes around this front part of the steering column cover. I think the scanner mistakenly thought the tracking dots were holes in the part, but that's okay. I can work around that in Fusion 360, which is the CAD software that I'll be using. So I'm gonna hit finish. And then all you do is export. I like to export it as a OBJ file, and that imports just fine in Fusion 360. I also have the scan result for the interior with not just the steering column cover, but the steering wheel and gauge cluster and whatnot. I wanted to have this scan data and model because once I design the gauges, I kind of want to see what the position of the gauges are relative to, say, the steering wheel or the gauge cluster, because we want to make sure those gauges are in a position where the line of sight is still good and readable, and it's not like blocking gauges, or the steering wheel is not blocking the aftermarket gauges or whatnot. But we should probably do the same cleanup that we did with the steering column cover. So same process, we do the cropping, select your tool, and I'll just do a quick one for demonstration purposes. Once you're happy with your cleanup, hit finish. Before we export the scan data, we have to generate the mesh. I'll leave it the way it is. And that's the result of the interior. So just like the steering column cover, I'm going to go ahead and export this as an OBJ file and then import it to Fusion 360. So I have Fusion 360 open. I already imported the scan models, but for those that want to know how easy it is, you basically just go to the mesh tab, go under create, insert mesh, and then select your file. So I already have it loaded up in this project here, so that's what I'm going to start up with. I'm not going to show every step here, but the main thing I wanted to show is using forms. So the hardest or the most difficult part of this project is getting the shape of the steering column cover, because once you have that shape, then we can kind of offset it or thicken it and treat it as a platform in which we could attach gauges to. The steering column cover is a complex shape. It's not purely squares and circles. Maybe it is, but I think you can better replicate it or reverse engineer it by using forms. So the way you do forms is you hit this create form button under the solid tab, and now that you're in the form editing mode, what I like to do is just create a whole bunch of faces. So this is the face button up here, and you got to do object snap. So what that does is you're going to make faces, which is kind of like a rectangle, but it will snap the positions of the points of the faces onto the scan model. And as you do that, you're starting to recreate the shape of the steering column cover. So I made one face there. I'm going to keep going. And you got to remember to snap onto the previous faces that you've created, as well as the object itself. And you just keep doing this until you cover the entire surface of the steering column cover. Now you might ask, how do you know how big these faces need to be, or how many there has to be? My recommendation is to keep it as few as possible and not too many, because you don't want it to be overly complicated. So for example, as I'm approaching this corner curve here, I want enough faces to kind of give Fusion 360 the ability to kind of follow this curve. So let me show you what happens when you have too few faces. Say I snap to this face and jump all the way down to the vertical side of the steering column cover. And since I didn't give Fusion 360 enough faces, it kind of just goes from this edge of the face that I completed previously to this vertical wall. So it needs something in between here to kind of give it enough resolution, I guess is the term, that you can say to follow this curve. So I'm going to undo this real quick. So instead of making one giant face, I'm going to do an intermediate one just at the edge. Then I'm going to continue on down to that vertical face. And I'm just going to go ahead and keep going. And now Fusion 360 had a better opportunity to follow that curve because I gave it enough faces to work with. And you could actually add a few more faces here because you can tell that it's still kind of not rounding out to follow this curve. But yeah, you would just insert more faces. So I'm not going to show every step that I did to kind of reverse engineer the steering column cover, but this is the gist of it. It's just using forms and a whole bunch of faces. Let me show you the end result though on what I came up with. Here's a completed form that I did for the steering column cover, and you can see I didn't use too many faces, but it was enough to kind of make sure that it can follow the surface of the steering column cover. Another trick that I did was I drew a construction line down the middle, and I only kind of reverse engineered half of it and then copied it over or mirrored it over to the other side. So this was the end result. Now that you have the surface that kind of sits on top of the steering column cover, now you can thicken it and make a cover. So I thickened it to about 2 millimeters. And my goal is to have a platform or a base for the gauges to sit on. I initially thought about recreating the entire steering column cover, but I'm not an expert on Fusion 360. I think I can do it. It's just gonna take a lot of time. And I think it would just be easier and a lot simpler and faster to print if I just had something that sat on top of it. So that's what I ended up doing, and that's why I didn't do the entire steering column cover. I just wanted something simple that sat on top of it. So I only did the top piece here, didn't bother with all the features on the bottom. And now I have a base for gauges to sit on top of. But before I move on to the gauges, how I wanted to secure this cover on top of the steering column cover is I'm going to use the mount. So the way the OEM steering column cover attaches to the car is a bolt that goes down this hole. So that's going to be one fastening point that I reverse engineered, and we'll use that to secure the cover on top of the steering column. Then I went ahead and made some clips in the front to kind of just snap onto the existing steering cover. So now I have 3 points to secure the cover. I have that mounting hole up here and the 2 clips that kind of just grab the OEM cover. And I think that's going to be enough to secure this cover on top of it. Now that I have the cover completed, I have a platform for the gauges. So let me show the gauges next. So the gauges are just a bunch of circles that are extruded and squares or whatnot. And so I basically kind of made a neck that went from the gauge to the cover that I made. And that's how the gauges will attach to the cover. So the beauty of doing it this way is having a 3D printer, you can pretty much print any shape. So you can make these gauges in any position, make the attachment points as complex as you want. But the ability of 3D printing allows you to make it a solid in real life, no matter what the shape is. So that's what's so cool about it. The last thing I want to show you guys on Fusion 360 is the scan model of the interior. So the reason I did that is so I can visualize the placement of the gauges. So it looks like the steering wheel is blocking here, but in actuality, you kind of see more of the OEM cluster behind it. So that's okay, but you can also see that it clears the sides of the OEM cluster. So again, a little extra work, but I think it's worthwhile to scan the interior of the car so you can better visualize how the design kind of fits with everything. I wanted to be transparent with you guys and give you a taste of reality with this whole 3D scanning and printing process. It's not as straightforward as I'm showing it. I may have summarized everything in 5 to 10 minutes, but just to be transparent with everyone, I went through about 10 iterations of the design before I got to the final product. I want to share with you guys some of those iterations to kind of show how I got from, the draft designs to the final design. So I first started with just trying to get that cover correct. And this was probably the hardest part. And this one is, I think, the first one. And you could see there's like this weird crease here and it's not symmetric. But it was getting there. It was starting to kind of mate with the steering column cover pretty well. Once I got that shape correct, I then worked on the mounting hole. That took a few to get it right as far as position and size. And then once I got that mounting hole done, getting these little clips to snap onto the steering column cover took a few tries as well, just to get the size just right. But it's so satisfying when it is correct, because I'll show you in a second, it just snaps on there pretty good. Then the next design, I mounted the gauges a little forward compared to the final product because that's where I originally thought I wanted it. And so I changed my mind. I think it was too close to the steering wheel. So I ended up changing the position, and you could see here I made these gauge pods a little too tight and I couldn't get the gauge out after pushing it in here, so I had to like cut it out to recover the gauges. Then I played with adding those zip tie features. So that was another iteration. And then as I was nearing the final piece, this is the second to the last iteration. It was almost there, but before I did the final print, I made some cutouts underneath the gauges so I could insert and remove the gauge while keeping the wires intact. So let me show you guys the final product. And here's the final product with the little cutouts at the bottom. So yeah, everything that I showed you was PLA except for this last piece. This was again made with carbon fiber reinforced nylon. I did receive a lot of comments on my last video that this material was overkill, but we're car guys, we like carbon fiber, but to be honest, I just had some left over that I wanted to run out, so I made the final piece in carbon fiber reinforced nylon again. Here's the final product. Just wanted to show you guys how well it snaps on to the OEM steering cover. So it kind of just goes on here, and listen to this snap. It's really satisfying to kind of like hear. But yeah, it snaps right on there. And so the screw will go here and attach to the steering column. And so that will be the fastening points one here, the screw, and the 2 clips should be more than enough to keep these gauges from moving around. Before we try the final finished design on the car itself, I wanted to give one last disclaimer. Yes, you can buy some universal gauge pods. I had this one sitting around in my parts bin. They're relatively inexpensive. I've seen some other gauge pods that are specific to the application to my car, and yeah, that works too, but it's like $100 or whatnot. But I think the advantages of 3D scanning and printing is still just customization. It's like you can make it exactly the way you want it. And additionally, these gauge pods, the universal ones, they don't sit flat on the OEM cover. I mean, you could try and make it work, but it just doesn't sit right. Additionally, you might not want to drill any holes on your existing cover, and maybe the gauge pod is the wrong size or the wrong length. So again, I'm just emphasizing how cool designing your own and 3D printing is. You could just really do it your own and make it super custom for you. And here's the final print and mounted on the car. Looks super clean. Let me get a POV view. And this is what it looks like from the driver point of view. Super clean, very visible, clear as the steering wheel. And it's just a nice fit and look. The 3D scanner and the 3D printer pulls through again. I was able to scan the steering column cover, make a platform out of it, and basically now that I have a platform, I could CAD up 1, 2, 3 gauges, maybe some other sort of device that can monitor the car or whatnot. But basically with that platform, I can make anything sit on top of it with CAD and 3D printing. So that's the beauty of this whole tool with the scanner and printer. It's because you can make anything you want to your needs. So until the next one.